Hey, this is Scott at Fire Breathing Christian, and if there's one thing we're supposed to know by now, after decades of intense education and news reporting from the NPC Media, it's that nationalism is bad. Nationalism is evil. As a matter of fact, if you actually think that the national borders of the United States are important and ought to be preserved, that they ought to be meaningful in some way as distinguishing the United States from the non-United States, well, then you're basically Hitler. That's the idea here that's been propagated, and now more intensely than ever as we have this caravan and or army of people approaching from Central and South America. Efforts are ramping up in the NPC media, and we're seeing a lot of articles. We're going to cover a couple of them here. One's from the NPC Times, and then there's this beautiful bit over at CBS News, NPCBS News, what Trump is talking about when he talks about nationalism. And this is an interesting article. I want to use it as a reference point, though there are 100 other similar articles out there, of course. That's just kind of how NPC Media works. So let's dive into this one. Really, we're not supposed to use that word, President Trump said at his rally in Houston Monday night. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist. Okay, I'm a nationalist. Nationalist. Use that word, use that word. It wasn't the first time Mr. Trump had embraced the nationalist label, but to some commentators on the left, the president's phrasing indicated that he was not so subtly proclaiming himself a white supremacist. So this is interesting. You say you're a nationalist. Now, I think it's important since, words matter, definitions matter, and actually some of the leftist NPC nutcases who've been jumping on this issue with Trump tried to actually act as though the definition of nationalist was what they imagined in their mind, including all the racial attachments, when it's just not so. Nationalist here, and we're just going to go to Merriam-Webster. It's one of many good sources on this, but nationalist means an advocate or believer of, or advocate of or believer in nationalism. That's the first definition. Or secondarily, a member of a political party or group advocating national independence or strong national government. Okay, I don't see the racial component. Doesn't seem to be there, but let's go to nationalism. Since it's referring to nationalism, we'll go to Merriam-Webster's definition of nationalism. Number one, this is it. Loyalty and devotion to a nation. Elaborated here as especially a sense of national consciousness, exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests as opposed to those of other nations or supranational groups. Okay, and then the second definition here is a nationalist movement or government. Okay, so to that, see, for a leftist, but we all know that they're accustomed to, it's their normal, part of their NPC programming is to insert race, again, part of the identity politics script. Things have to be racially divided, racially defined. You have to shove things into identity politics categories. And so I don't doubt that some leftists actually think the definition of nationalism does include like a synonym for Hitler, something like that, but it just isn't so at all. That's not it. There are some understandings of the term that you do associate with more radical, right-wingy, left-wingy, big state, socialist government types. Yeah, like the Nazis, National Socialists, after all. Never forget that. The Nazi Party, Nazi stands for National Socialist, okay? That's important to keep in mind. These are big government socialists. But let's just be plain. Nationalist, being a nationalist or being for nationalism does not in any way, shape, or form inherently associate you with at all, 0%, anything racial, okay? It just isn't so. And yet leftists, they can't, the reality that is not their reality. They have a hard time dealing with or accepting objective reality, and so they make up their own as they go. And in their made-up fictional fantasy land, referring to yourself as a nationalist means you've just said white nationalist. They hear the word white before nationalist. It's just part of the word to them. And then they take their imagined edition and then go on to assume that, well, that's what the word actually means for everybody. It really means white nationalist, which, okay. This article continues, that's a term that can be defined a couple of different ways, but is typically used to describe racists who believe only people of European heritage can be called real Americans. And that's the thing that leftists, identity politics, cultural Marxists who are destroying the country and literally want us to have no borders, no integrity, no structure at all. You know, they want you to understand nationalism that way, but it just isn't so. And this is why, and again, I don't know Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I'm not a huge fan, although I'm getting to be more of a fan the more I see him do certain things. But he can use this label legitimately and honestly and not at all be associating himself with racism of any sort, even though we all know that the NPC media cannot help. Again, literally cannot help. They're NPCs. They're programmed, non-thinking beings. They have a narrative. They have a script. They can't deviate from it. So Trump must be racist. Just as you or I, if we want a border, if we don't want thousands and thousands of people to gather in a column and then just march into the country, our country, the United States of America, without some kind of process in place to handle that, some sort of law, legal system, that kind of thing, well, then we're inherently racist from their perspective, you see. That's how that works from the NPC media's perspective. Another example here of how, in conjunction with the assault on nationalism, the idea of a nation being something worth preserving, that if you even think that way, you're a racist, then we're also getting, from the other side, articles like this butte from the NPC Times, the New York Times, where we're told that this caravan that's approaching the southern border, migrant caravan driven by hope but uncertain of success. So again, huge emotional ploy here by NPC Media. We're going to read through this article a little bit using the NPC voice to sort of add the proper flavor to this bit of NPC propaganda. Migrant caravan driven by hope but uncertain of success, because we're being told what to think here. You know, you're one programmed bot to another. We're receiving our programming, our instruction from the higher up machine, or higher up cog in the machine. Soon after dawn on Tuesday, the mayor stood on the central plaza of his town here in southern Mexico and took stock. Thousands of migrants, men, women, entire families, had wandered into town the day before, many on foot, and turned the humble commercial district into a vast makeshift encampment. They had filled every square foot of the plaza, including its bandshell, and jammed the sidewalks and storefronts, sprawling on cardboard blankets, plastic sheeting, and spare clothes. And here, it's interesting to note, all of a sudden, the NPC Times that hates biological, scientific gender distinctions, men and women, they're citing these things. Then they're talking about families. All of a sudden, the NPC Times is interested in families. Men, women, families, even though they're constantly at war with the fundamental definition of any of these things. But right now, these are terms good enough to use in this context to try to emotionally manipulate us into supporting this invasion force. And it's what it is. And I'm not trying to be mean. I'm sure there are a lot of wonderful, hardworking people, good people in this group. But when you have thousands and thousands of people gathering together to openly flaunt the borders of a nation, disregarding the law, that's called illegal activity. And again, we can argue about whether that should be so, should be different, whatever. They're announcing their disregard for the laws of the United States as they march in a large column into the United States. That kind of matters, okay? And then interestingly here we see in the next quote, "This is straight up biblical," said Julio Raul Garcia Marquez, 43, a Guatemalan traveling with his wife, their 1-year-old son, and a cousin. They spent part of the night on sheets of cardboard in the central square. Nearby, 2 pairs of jeans had been hung to dry on the bust of a hero of the Mexican Revolution. Municipal trash cans were buried under mounds of garbage. But the town's mayor, Jose Luis La Parra Calderon, was upbeat, even cheerful. Quote, "These people are fleeing from the poverty of their countries," he said. "These are working people. They aren't bringing bombs. They want to improve their lives." He added, "We want to make their passage through here as agreeable for them as possible." So we're being programmed here. A lot of emotional manipulation. Disregard the fact that, you know, most of these people are fleeing more socialist, more leftist, Marxist, you know, hellholes that have been created by the worldview embraced by the likes of the NPC Times. But we'll set that aside for a minute. I want to go back here to, in conjunction with this idea of the NPC Times now appealing to concepts like, you know, men, women, and families. Then they go on to biblical. This is straight up biblical, you know, said Julio Raul Garcia Marquez. So biblical too. We're getting all these terms that the NPC Times and its minions, its ilk, are just openly opposed to. They hate biblical. They hate families. They hate biological objective definitions of men and women. Remember, the NPC Times thinks Bruce Jenner is a woman. They think that. And they think that if you don't think that, you're a problem. You're the crazy one. Never forget that. These people, not only do they not know how to properly define the most basic things like men and women and families, but they're openly opposed to and hostile to the actual accurate definitions of those things. So it's interesting to see that even in the NPC script that's permeating this article aimed at making us emotionally bond with this invading army of people, referring to it as a caravan of these wonderful women, families proceeding on this biblical quest. They're just fleeing poverty, all these things. Yet we don't see from the NPC media what you would see from any competent, basic, competent journalist, actual professional journalist, which would be, gosh golly gee, who's funding and coordinating this incredible effort? There's a lot of logistical difficulty involved here, isn't there? That's a lot of people to get to move this way and to supply and to coordinate. So actual journalists, if there were any at the NPC Times, would be trying to get answers to those questions because those are really important questions. But we don't see that, do we, from the NPC Times? No, instead from NPC Media, we get nationalism is evil, national borders are racist. If you like your nation so much that you actually want its borders to be enforced, you're a racist. You're probably also a sexist and a blankophobe too, but you're definitely a racist. And we don't really need to know who's funding or, I mean, it's probably just some saint, some angelic. I mean, this biblical quest by this marching column of people, they're probably being fed by manna from heaven. It's probably just falling all around them as they come. You know, that's probably what's going on. If it's not and someone's actually paying for it, it's some angelic saint like maybe George Soros or a friend or something like that. I know that there had been some stories that Venezuela had funded this, which it's kind of funny to imagine Venezuela funding anything at this point, but it wouldn't be completely surprising to find that they spent their last bit of wealth taking this shot at the country that they hate so much, the United States of America. Whether Venezuela's involved or not, what we do see clearly in NPC, fake news, mainstream media is they hate America. And if you love America as a nation or a construct or whatever you want to call it, the idea of a nation state, and you love a particular nation state, you maybe are even, let's just say, nationalistic about the United States of America, well, guess what? You're a racist. Think about that. Think about that as you take in this propaganda. Think about that as this story is chronicled. And it's going to be interesting as this caravan, this army and/or caravan approaches the southern border. How's it going to be reported? What's going to happen? Are we ever going to find out who's funding and coordinating this? Those seem like questions that an actual journalist will endeavor to answer. I just don't know that any of those journalists, that sort of journalist, is employed at the NPC Times or anywhere else in NPC Media. We'll find out. In the meantime, keep an eye on this and remember that nationalism is not racism. If you appreciated this video and you want to support what we're doing, please like the video, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the little bell icon so that you can be notified every time we post a new video, which we're hoping to do regularly on a daily basis from here on out on this subject and related subjects. Thank you very much for your support. Without it, we can't continue to do this.